Hi, friends, and welcome to Illuminate, a storytelling podcast from the Christ Church NYC LGBTQIA+ ministry. Here in season 2 of Illuminate, we're exploring more stories of moments and experiences that illuminate queer spirituality, both from congregants here in Christ Church, New York City, and from friends of our congregation, like a special guest that we have today. For those who don't know me, my name is Tyler Heston. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve here at Christ Church as our minister for spiritual formation and LGBTQIA+ development. And it is a gift to have a dear friend of mine, Stan Williams, join us today for this episode of Illuminate. Stan, would you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Stan Williams, and I've stopped saying pronouns because I don't feel like that defines me. I have lived in New York since the late 80s. I'm a writer, and I'm a member of Marble Collegiate Church. I've been a member for almost 10 years, but I am a Tyler Heston super fan, and I do love Christ Church for all the programs that it offers, many of which I've participated in. And I always learn something, and you have a wonderful congregation, and I am looking forward to our upcoming retreat together.
Yeah, you are not a stranger around these Christ Church parts. But before we dive in, we have some great stories and great conversation ahead of us. But let's talk a bit about that retreat, because that's exciting. So for those of you who may not know, we have another Illuminate event coming up, along with this podcast and along with our Illuminate Pride service that we do at Christ Church each year. Stan and I and a lovely team, a lovely planning committee from Christ Church and Marble Collegiate Church communities are working on the Illuminate Day Retreat that's coming up in a couple weeks from when we're recording this right now, but it's Saturday, May 10th. We have an amazing little day scheduled of workshops with a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Rylan A. Booth, who's a poet, that's going to come share a bit about how to view our lives as poetry, but our lives too as parable, and worship and meditation and interactive art installations, all exploring queer spirituality. Stan, this has kind of been a brainchild of ours. We've been talking about this for quite some time. So
Yeah. I mean, we're from a Marble perspective, we're really proud of our church. We're really proud of our LGBTQ plus ministry. And so we're really looking forward to having new experiences. And I think that is what we do as queer people, is that we cast a wide net and we want more people at the table. We don't want just our little siloed groups. We want to have a bigger group, and we want to be friends with other denominations and other organizations, because we all know that when we do that, we A, have a lot more fun, and B, we become stronger as a community.
Preach, he's preaching. Why have I never thought about ecumenicism as a queer practice? Like doing ecumenical work. I have, I guess, thought about that implicitly, but this is what we're doing: ecumenical queer practices, connecting with people across traditions to do something new together. And yeah, I'm excited. We'll throw some in the descriptions for this podcast, some links to our Illuminate Day Retreat, so that you listeners can learn more about what we have scheduled and how to sign up. Make sure to mark your calendars too for our Illuminate service on Thursday, June 5th. We have an amazing service scheduled here at Christ Church. All of these Illuminate ministries, which are housed here at Christ Church, but this Illuminate Day Retreat is very much a partnership effort with Marble Church. I mean, so much of my vision is just what you said, Stan, creating something that's not just for Christ Church people or Christ Church regulars, but something that's open to all people, because I know that we grow as a church and we have meaningful spaces to interact and grow and converse with people from other traditions, other backgrounds, because like you said, we're all better together. So yeah, I'm excited. Well, I want the whole world to know more about how we know each other, Stan, how we met way back in Kansas City before I even moved to New York, but we'll let those stories come out. Let's turn instead to a different story or a different conversation that you have prepared for us, Stan. So As hopefully regular listeners already know of this Illuminate podcast, each episode, different guests like yourself are asked to come and share a little bit about something that illuminates queer spirituality to you. And so, Stan, I think you have a story or some thoughts prepared, but I'll turn it over to you. What illuminates what queer spirituality is to you?
Well, I think that a lot of us who identify as members of the queer community, we've been parts of churches that we so desperately wanted to be part of. We so wanted to belong. We so loved the music. We so loved the people. Yet we didn't quite feel loved back. My grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher. My grandmother on my mother's side had a leadership role, which was really unusual for a woman, in a Free Will Baptist church. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. So you can just imagine the kinds of things that I was surrounded by. For me, the church experience was terrifying. It was all about the end of time. For me, it was feeling like I wasn't worthy to be there. I never answered an altar call. I was never baptized because I didn't feel good enough. And so when this weird queer kid in suburb of Kansas City, I really did not, I did the vacation Bible school, I did the Sunday school, I did all that stuff, but it didn't take. And when I say it didn't take, I learned all the things I thought I needed to learn. I memorized the Bible verses. It just didn't resonate with me because I didn't feel like I belonged. So basically, I was a kid who didn't have very many friends, who locked himself in his bedroom and listened to Dolly Parton. I listened to Dolly Parton day and night. I studied her as a person. I studied her music. And that is where I started to feel like, wow, this woman is weird like me. I mean, I never identified as a woman. I didn't even know what a drag queen was, but she was a drag queen. And so that is what got me through my teen days. And I was very active in school. My parents, were always supportive of me, never forced me to go to church. But when I turned 15, I took a job at Worlds of Fun, and I took every Sunday shift I could to never go back to that church. So for me, I have always prayed, not always sure to whom I was praying or to what I was praying, but I always prayed. I always felt like there was something bigger than I am. And that's a message that Dolly always talks about. There is something bigger than I am. And so I always knew that. I didn't know what a queer community was. I didn't know what it could look like. I had no idea. And Worlds of Fun showed me that. I hung out with all the queer people, hung out with all the theater people, not the people in my high school, but the people at Worlds of Fun. So it took years for me to start feeling comfortable exploring spirituality in a church setting. I experimented with MCC Community Church. I went there for a few years, but only because a really good friend of mine went there. And it just wasn't for me. It wasn't that people were unkind or anything. It just was not for me, and I stopped. And then when the shootings in Paris happened, the Paris Hebdo shootings happened, I felt like I needed to go somewhere. So I did research and I went online and I looked for a church that had a strong LGBTQ plus ministry, and B, it just happened that I landed on Marble. And it just happened that that Sunday they were having a tri-faith service. And that's when I decided I'm going to go check it out. And so I've continued there, and I've been a member for, it'll be 10 years in next January. But we touched on this earlier, sometimes our churches don't give us everything we need. They forget we're there even though they don't think they do. So sometimes we have to go other places to be fulfilled. And I found that in Christchurch and some of the programs that you've offered. But I also know that, Marble is the place that made me feel worthy. Marble is a place where I was finally baptized, and I didn't have to do a hideous altar call. I didn't have to do all that stuff because I was petrified of that.
Yeah, no kidding.
So there's my story.
Hallelujah. No, that's beautiful. And there's like 8 strands that I want to pull out that connect with so many things I'm thinking about. But first, it's gorgeous to bring the Dollyism of like, there's always something bigger like than yourself. How beautiful it is to me. I don't think I knew this fact or the tidbit that your first Sunday at Marble was a tri-faith Sunday. So it was like Jewish, Muslim, and Christian voices all worshiping or engaging together. That's like, what a beautiful entry back into church, especially contra.
And that's queer too. It is queer. It's not what a lot of places of faith would say is, quote, normal.
Or good or standard. And yeah, queer not as an LGBTQ, but queer as a non-normative, or queer as in multiplicity, polyvocality, to use 2 scholarly words that I've been drowning in recently in paper writing season. But no, exactly that like multitudinousness, that polyvocality, the knowledge that there's so many ways to be and to glean inspiration in the world is what queerness is all about. And to me, that should be baked into our experiences of churches, but like you said, they often aren't. And so we have to find things ourselves. I don't like to build binaries or categorize things as one or the other, but it seems like a lot of us queer kids who grow up in church wanting so badly to be there, but also knowing that we're not fully welcome there. It's like there's a decision to either kind of do what you did and step back and find it elsewhere, or dive so much deeper into church and try so hard to make the church that we love, the church that we grew up in, the church that we're familiar with, safe for us. Maybe I did a little bit of both, because by the time I came out, I kind of Irish goodbye'd and left my own church of origin. But for a while, I was way more in it. I was like, well, this is still going to give me everything that I need. So I admire your like self-knowledge, I think, at an early age, to step back and say like, actually, Dolly Parton's going to teach me more about God than this pastor might, or Worlds of Fun is going to be more of a sacred sanctuary than a church building, which for those of you who have not spent summers going to Worlds of Fun, it was one of the largest and most magnificent theme parks in like the 70s and 80s, and now it's Kansas City's cute little theme park. And last time I took a youth group there into the water park, I did not want to get into any of those dingy little slides, but it's a fun place. I love the Eagle. That roller coaster still slaps. But I love Worlds of Fun. I love amusement parks. I thought I was going to be a roller coaster designer instead of a pastor when I was growing up. So, Stan, we were on some of the same wavelength.
Worlds of Fun was like living in a fantasy land. It really was an escape for me. The day I turned 16, I got my driver's license. I immediately drove out I-435 by myself, and immediately I felt like that was my world. I don't know how to describe it other than it was something that was so unimaginable to be in every single day. I worked there. Gosh, I worked there from the time I was 15 to the time I was 21.
Thinking about it more, and Worlds of Fun, I mean, I guess a lot of theme parks kind of do this, where there's all the different, I mean, Disney's the chief example, but all these different worlds within it. But Worlds of Fun, particular, like each section's like a different part of the globe, which kind of gives cringy colonialism now, looking or going back. I don't know, maybe it's a little more tasteful and a little more like, ooh, celebrating. But it doesn't always. Anyway, that's beyond the. Setting that aside, there's something that ties back to that multiplicity of like what it means to do queer spirituality, maybe itself, like how beautiful or poetic it is that the place that you found safe, that you found not just safe but brave, and the like permission to be who you are, this place of imagination, this place of dreaming otherwise, this fantasy, not in the like escapism but in the I'm going to create the world that I want to live in, happened in a place that was all about multiplicity and transnational diversity, to use other scholarly terms, even if they didn't know that they were doing that when they were building their theme park. But this, like what it means to be in a literal space designated to celebrate all these different ways of being in the world. Like, again, that's what church should be, can be, but isn't always.
Yeah, you know what I did there?
No, I don't know what you did there, actually. What did you do there?
So at the time, Worlds of Fun, when it was built, it had all these artifacts from Hollywood films. And the artifact that I worked atop was the showboat that was in the film Showboat.
Oh,
And it was the Cotton Blossom. And I worked at a photography shop where we dressed people up in old-timey clothes and took faux tintypes. So basically, I was dressing people up in drag at the age of 15.
uh-huh. And playing, I mean, like using the past to imagine new futures. Like that's what queerness is all about. Oh,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. You ended up not just writing, but writing in the fashion world,
Yeah.
particularly. Worlds of Fun really did change you, Stan. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed. Well, through this podcast, we're exploring different understandings, definitions of queerness, of spirituality. Before I lob one of those particular questions to you, hi, like, one of the things I find powerful about your story, and kind of not envious of, but like the part of me that wishes I knew better than to stick around my own church through high school and college. I wish I had snuck out at 16 and started finding safer spaces for myself because I waited a little bit later than that. Your story shows some implicit self-knowledge, like a way of knowing yourself. You knew that this church wasn't giving you everything that you needed, which seems to be a theme resonant with so many of these stories of queer people growing up in church. But I like, there's something beautiful about how you knew this, and even if you couldn't necessarily articulate it, which sounds like you could have, but like you can today, you knew to go find that space, that this church wasn't going to get it. So like, you knew that you were enough on your own, that you didn't need that church's approval, but that you could still go find a place in which that could be true. I wonder, so we've talked a little bit about what queerness might mean. Maybe we'll get back to that. But with that element in mind, that intuitive understanding of yourself, that knowledge that there is more than what this one organization, this one community is selling me, like, how does that influence what you think of spirituality as today? Or if you had to define spirituality, how would you define it? Or what does spirituality mean to you?
I think that spirituality really involves trusting your gut and knowing what's right. Sometimes we're told things that we're like, huh? How could that be? And why is it that way? I feel like spirituality gives you the knowledge. You know what's right. I know what's right. And also, I feel like spirituality opens us up to new experiences. Spirituality sort of, it frees us. It frees us from like the burden of like the old and the things that weigh us down.
Some of what I'm like always exploring through Illuminate and through my scholarship and my life is the synonymous nature of queerness and spirituality, which even for a second I was like, wait, did I ask about spirituality or queerness? Because I think your answer could
Spirituality.
have been attributed to both. But
It could be queerness too. It's the same thing.
yeah, and not like, for both queerness and spirituality is that which frees us into the new. It's not this. I mean, it's a radical departure sometimes, but it's not pretending that the past wasn't there or that the place we come from no longer exists or never existed, but about using things from the past to imagine a new future. Again, like what you did at Worlds of Fun by dragging people out in vintage and antique clothing to have fun, and it may be a frivolous moment in that context, but there's still something about that action that shows what queerness and spirituality is, moving together into a new future. There was something you said about opening to new experiences that I was going to dive deeper into or ask a follow-up question about. But I think it was just that the old still comes with us, or it's not antagonism of the new and of the old, but it's a deeper creativity that appreciates the old, while you're doing something new, and that's something I think I see in you, Stan, and how you do things really well. We're at churches that in some ways are really traditional along with doing new things. We're in these communities that understand this dance of time as it unfolds. But I really like thinking of spirituality now as, oh, this feels good because it's familiar, because it's what I'm used to, but is that which opens us up into new things.
But when you get into queerness, though, achieving that is not without heartache.
Hmm. Speak more to that.
Because just look what's happening in our nation. Look at all the steps forward we've made, and they are being eroded. And unfortunately, I think that in sometimes churches we have those experiences as well. You know, we walk in and we're excited, we feel like we're in a welcoming space, and then all of a sudden you're like, they know I'm gay, right?
Hmm.
They know I'm queer. They know that, right? They actually said that. They did that. They lifted this thing up. Hey, I'm still here. So it's this constant little bit of heartache too.
Yeah. And it's not linear. It's not like the newness that queer
Oh,
spirituality brings us to accomplishes things that we can hold on to forever. Those things come and go. That's what it was. Is you spirituality enables us to open up into the unknown. He said something along those lines, and it was the unknowedness, the mystery of it that I find interesting, because thinking about spirituality as trusting your gut is how I think about things. Like this Illuminate Day retreat that we're getting ready for, our guest poet and workshop leaders talking about trusting your own voice and telling the parable of your own life. That is so intrinsic to what we do and what we need support in doing as queer people of faith. But there's a difference in this queer spirituality of trusting your gut than saying, well, I know everything that's right, or like it's not your first reaction is the right answer, but rather this deeper understanding that sometimes you're going to know something that steps you into the unknown. You may not know everything, but you know to take this next step. You know to stop going to this one thing that you've been doing your childhood and do something new on Sunday mornings. To like, I can't explain it, but this isn't right for me, and I need to go find what is, even if I don't know what it is yet. So it's this trust that doesn't need to have all the answers from what
yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
you describe it and my own addendums to it. But this a spirituality that's okay with an unknowing, but not this like formless unknowing that's still like, when I know that I need to take a step or know that I need to do something, I'm going to do it because my body knows what it needs. My spirit knows what it needs. The part of God that's within me knows what I need. That's, yeah, that's powerful.
And sometimes it's a step back.
Yes. It's not always a step forward. Step back from the things that we're doing, or step back from
Yeah.
what we thought was progress, right? And
Yes.
step back to rest. Ooh, she's a dance.
It is.
Dance.
And we queer people like to dance.
We sure do,
Most
Tadal.
people do. I mean, some do. I do.
You know, New York's giving me hope that it's not just queer people who want to dance. When I lived in Kansas City, I thought it was only us, but sometimes I go to the places that I think are gay, and I think I'm going to be around gay people dancing and queer people dancing, and there's a lot of people who aren't, and I guess I love that they're there, actually. It's beautiful. Multiplicity. We can all dance. Um, Yay. So I love this. So some of the other questions that I'm asking our guests for Illuminate, along with kind of describing what queerness and spirituality is, which are things that we can never fully define, and that's part of the fun. I have a couple other questions, and I'm going to go about them in the reversed way, or the reversed order that I shared them with you before we get on this recording stand. And so the last question that I'm asking, that I'll ask you now, is what does being queer teach you about God? Kind of talked about some of this already, but think about who God is, how God works. What is being queer? What is being LGBTQIA plus? What does queerness teach you about God?
I think just like many of us are rejecting labels, the more I learn, the more I feel about who and what God is, that it's even harder to put a label on who or what God is. I know this sounds, maybe it sounds disrespectful, but I kind of think of it as how people give dogs human quality, or their pets like human qualities.
Uh-huh.
And I know that we are made in God's image, supposedly, but I don't think that our definitions, our human definitions of what God is, fit.
Hmm.
I don't think we can assign human qualities to God in the same way we assign human qualities to other things.
Yeah.
So for me, it's this amazing, wonderful, awe inspiring thing that happens. Like, seriously, like when I met you, I was like, oh my, oh wow, this is someone who is representing God. And I've had that experience before with other people, when you kind of like have that moment, you're like, wow, there was a reason I was here. Maybe not the reason I thought I was supposed to be here, but I came here for this. But wow, this is why I'm really here. And I think that in some way, that's God leading us to things, to experiences. Sometimes they're not what we think they're supposed to be, but then sometimes they are.
Even more than we knew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've been so deep in some queer and trans theory that's kind of anti-category, philosophically speaking, and even about the note that you used at the beginning about pronouns. Like, I'm starting to feel weird using my own pronouns in introductions because I've been reading a trans theorist in particular who argues that the very categories of gender that are even unintentionally reified and asking someone's pronouns by imposing this ontology of gender categories, they call it violent in like a meta philosophical sense, not like a physically violent way, but like it doesn't do us good to have these categories. And there's so much trans and queer theory, trans and queer theology that is even like turning things full circle to question the category of the human. So to think about the faux pas, the shortcomings of anthropomorphizing our dogs, making them into humans, or anthropomorphizing God, making God look like we know a human is. Like it assumes that there is a standard of what it means to be human in the first place. But a lot of queer and trans theorists, and a lot of black theorists, and a lot of disability theorists, and a lot of theorists from all sort, feminist theorists, are all strands are really questioning. And a lot of contemporary critical theory right now is like, what does it even mean to be human? There is no singular platonic ideal of the human. And as soon as we lift up this idea of a proper human, we have a metric to judge ourselves against and to judge other people against. So there's this move in that world to think post humanity, which is not like tech developing, growing ourselves into robots. Post humanism in the theoretical sense is like not caring about there being a singular definition of the human. But that's something that queerness, I think, intuits, is what you're saying. There's no one right way to be God, so I'm not going to be able to give any labels or categories to what God is. I got to experience this divinity as it unfolds in these unexpected, sometimes serendipitous, sometimes confronting ways in my life.
Someone said to me a while back, and it's something I think about a lot. We're often defined by what we do, like, what's your job? And she's like, when people ask you what you do, why don't you just say, I'm me? I'm me,
Yeah.
Why do we have to define ourselves in those ways? But unfortunately, that's our society. Every time I fill out one of those drop down menus, I'm like,
Yeah.
ugh, do I really need to do this?
Or that's what's even interesting about the question, like, what do you do? It often implies, like, what are you? Are you a lawyer? Are you a doctor? Are you a pastor? Are you a writer? Are you a server? Are you a this? When, like, I catch myself, this happened at church or somewhere the other day, I caught myself asking, what do you do for work? And I always follow that question up with, you are more than whatever you do for work. I'm just trying to understand how you spend your time and not categorize your being, your essence, but like, what do you do? Like, how do you pass the time? because that's what's more important, like what happens, what encounters, what experiences versus what identities or labels or categories, which who that is such a theoretically and theologically rife conversation. And I mean, there's hundreds of years of Christian theology that some would call apophatic that all sits within this idea that we can never fully describe God. We can only say what God is not, so we can't ever say what God is. I think some apophatic theology is kind of boring because it's not queer or fun or mystical. It's just theoretically, yeah. This is a more fun apophatic theology. We can't categorize God, so let's experience God.
But I identified myself in the very beginning. I call myself a writer. But I really want to come up with some other things like, oh, I sew, or I read books.
Cool. Well, the last question that I'll offer you, Stan, and we can mosey on our way out of this lovely conversation, this wonderful podcast that we've been having. It's kind of flipping the question. So, what does being queer teach you about God? The other side of that question is, what do you think other people of faith, or other people for whom faith may not be their own language, what do you think other people can learn from queer perspectives of faith, especially those for whom such learning may be unexpected?
I think, a lot of people, a lot of queer people who practice some sort of faith or spirituality, it's pretty queer. Like it's a lot of people might not think that's typical. And I think that it shows a lot of faith in God when you continue to go back in places that have not always welcomed you. But you go because I decided that no longer was I going to be denied God's love. I was worthy of that. And so I think that everyone can learn from our community in that we've suffered a lot of heartache in houses of worship, yet we still come back.
I mean, that's what's so interesting about this whole idea of queerness and spirituality opening us up to something new. It's also opening us up to what was there all along, just hidden or unable to see. That, yeah, like religion, to be religious in my book, to be spiritual, is a pretty queer thing inherently, because you're trusting things that you can't see. You're trying to do something that goes against certain currents of normativity. So from that to, yeah, like it's the LGBTQ people building places for themselves in church aren't starting something from scratch. They're arguing for or not even justifying or arguing, but standing within a place that they've already been in, just being louder and being more clear and being more visible about it.
But it took me almost 50 years to get there. When I was younger, my parents used to come and spend the summer with me. They would come and spend couple of weeks or 10 days, and they always went to Marble Church.
Oh, wow.
They always went to Marble Church. They always asked me if I wanted to go, and I was like, no way.
Huh.
So my dad shared this with me a couple of years ago. We were talking about prayers, how prayers are answered, if prayers are answered. And he said to me, when Mom and I used to go to Marble, we always used to put in a prayer request that you would come there one day. And when he told me that, I was like, wow, because I never knew it.
Yeah.
And I found Marble on my own.
Yeah. Little did you know, little did he know, hey, little did God know that this was going to happen this way. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
The dance. It don't got to happen overnight.
I don't know if that fits your question. It just popped in my mind because I was thinking about prayer. I was thinking,
Yeah, all of this conversation is soaked in what it means to pray. Trust God with the unknowingness and unfolding. But that's a beautiful thread with which to tie the knot of your own story. That serendipity. That I love it. Well, are there any other thoughts or words or invitations floating around your mind that you'd like to offer before we wrap up, Stan?
Well, no, but just to say thank you, Tyler, for thinking of me for this. I feel really touched that you asked me to do this.
one of the first people that came to mind when we were deciding to do a season 2. So thank you, Stan, for your story, for your wisdom, for the capaciousness, the space that you make, and who you are at Marble and who you are outside, for helping us make this Illuminate Day retreat that's coming up happen. So much of what this conversation is, like, defines what Illuminate, this ministry term, a label, means to me. It, both showing new things, but also showing what was already here all along. Queer spirituality is not something we're creating from scratch necessarily. It's something we're unfolding from within churches already, and it's good to be in this work of unfolding it with you. So yes, thank you, Stan, and thank you, friends who have been watching and listening along. If any of this is sparking anything in your spirit, in your mind, I hope that you join us for the Illuminate Day Retreat on Saturday, May 10th from 10 to 2:30 p.m. at Marble Collegiate Church. We'll be in some of their meeting and sacred spaces for this retreat, in which we'll be exploring all of this queer spirituality that's already around us at all times, I think. Then we also have the Illuminate Pride service at Christ Church here on Thursday, June 5th. We'll get started at 6:30 with the service, with the reception to follow. We have a guest choir coming in from Nashville performing at that. We have a local minister, Bishop Vanessa Brown, who will be a guest storyteller at that event. More incredible ways to connect within Christ Church, but also outside of Christ Church with this world of God making all things new through things that we can call queer and spiritual. There's probably 1,000 other things that I could plug here, but you listeners and readers can find links to everything that we're up to at the Christ Church NYC LGBTQIA plus ministry and beyond at the links that we'll share in the descriptions and wherever you're finding this podcast. Stan, thank you again. And thank you, friends. Hope that you join us at something soon, and that whatever you're doing after listening to this Illuminate podcast brings you some new visions, new glimpses of a God who is queerly making things new. Thank you, and amen.